Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling like something invisible was taken from you? No harsh words, no arguments. Just emptiness. Jung had a name for this: psychic contagion. Not in the mystical sense, but psychological. These people, he believed, don't just drain your time, they consume your psychic energy. And it's not random. Jung famously said, "There are no coincidences." If your soul grows tired in someone's presence, again and again, your unconscious is sounding an alarm. You're not just tired, you're being activated. This takes us to a crucial concept in Jungian psychology: feeling-toned complexes. These are emotionally charged patterns formed in childhood, often tied to pain, neglect, or rejection. When someone enters your life who subconsciously resembles the person who first created that wound, a parent, a teacher, a bully, the complex lights up. Your past hijacks your present. You become defensive, on edge, confused, or worst of all, you begin to doubt your own perception. These emotional vampires don't always come dressed as villains. Sometimes, they wear the mask of empathy. They're vulnerable, they need you, they never ask for help outright. They bleed it out of you, bit by bit, and because you feel for them, you stay, you offer comfort, and you pay for it with your peace. Jung warned against this. He called it toxic empathy. When you become so entangled with another's suffering that you lose your own center, you begin to live for their emotional weather, sunny when they're fine, stormy when they're not, and over time you forget what you feel altogether. He believed that understanding could be a trap. When you understand someone's pain too much, especially someone who manipulates you with it, you lose the ability to draw a boundary. You justify, you excuse, you stay, and in doing so, you allow your shadow, the repressed parts of yourself, to be pulled into their orbit. That's why Jung might say, cut them off, not because they're evil, but because your unconscious already knows they're not safe, and your soul is trying to survive. Not all manipulation is malicious. Some of the most damaging people in our lives aren't calculating villains, they're unconscious manipulators, acting out invisible scripts written deep within the psyche. Carl Jung called this phenomenon psychic possession, when a person becomes a mouthpiece for archetypal forces without realizing it. These individuals often seem ordinary, even likable. They might be the friend who never celebrates your success, but always demands your sympathy, the co-worker who constantly plays the victim, twisting every disagreement into an emotional ambush, or the partner who subtly erodes your confidence while swearing they only want the best for you. They don't need to lie outright. The danger is subtler. They believe their narrative, and because they aren't aware of what possesses them, they're incapable of reflecting on it. Jung warned that when someone is possessed by an archetype, like the victim, the martyr, or the avenger, their sense of self is hijacked. Their ego becomes a vessel for collective emotions like envy, resentment, or fear. These patterns often originate in childhood or social conditioning, but over time they become contagious. That's the unsettling part. The unconscious is not a private space. It's like a psychic atmosphere we all breathe. People who are emotionally compromised often spread that energy to others. Just as yawns are contagious, so are moods, reactions, and archetypal roles. This is how propaganda spreads, not just through lies, but through people who are themselves infected. History shows us this clearly: mob mentality, moral panics, witch hunts. When individuals stop thinking for themselves and start embodying the collective shadow, atrocities can unfold in plain sight. So what can we do? First, realize that immunity comes through awareness. If someone constantly drains you, manipulates your empathy, or shames your authenticity, don't dismiss it just because they don't mean harm. Intent does not equal impact. Second, examine your own psyche. Are you ever playing a role without knowing it? Do you unconsciously guilt-trip others? Do you need to be needed? The unconscious manipulator is not just out there, it lives in all of us until we bring it into the light. In Jung's view, the most dangerous people are not the overtly evil, but the possessed. Not because they intend to hurt others, but because they've lost the capacity to see that they are. Innocent, perhaps. But infectious, absolutely. Carl Jung believed we all wear a mask. The persona. It's the version of ourselves we show to the world. It helps us function in society, helps us blend, belong, be liked. But sometimes, the mask becomes the person. You've met them. Maybe you've been them. The overly polished friend who's never vulnerable. The co-worker who always says the right thing, yet nothing ever feels real. The influencer who shares authentic moments on camera, but you sense it's just another performance. These people aren't necessarily malicious. They're just addicted to approval. Jung warned that when you over-identify with your persona, your inner self begins to starve. You start confusing attention with affection, performance with purpose. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your soul recedes into the background. The persona addict often seems charming, even inspirational, but spend enough time around them, and you'll feel something off. You might feel ashamed for being messy, guilty for being unsure. Their curated confidence becomes a mirror for your chaos, and instead of being seen, you feel exposed. Why? Because their mask doesn't just hide them, it demands that you wear one too. Jung called this the inflation of the persona. When the social mask grows so large, it blocks any connection to the self. The persona addict can't tolerate truth, especially yours. When you grow, they'll mock you. When you express pain, they'll retreat or reframe it to make themselves look wise. When you speak from the heart, they'll nod, but never meet you there. These people aren't evil, they're terrified. Terrified of losing control, of being ordinary, of being seen without the filter. Jung believed healing begins when we stop mistaking applause for love, when we shed the need to be impressive, and learn to be real. In today's culture, where even vulnerability is monetized, it's easy to become a persona addict. We post instead of connect. We brand ourselves instead of knowing ourselves. But here's the catch. The more addicted you are to your mask, the less love you can receive. Because deep down, you know what they're loving isn't you. It's the costume. And no matter how loud the applause gets, your soul still whispers, "This isn't me." Some people will never see you clearly. Not because they can't, but because they won't. Jung called it projection. When the parts of ourselves we refuse to accept get launched onto others like psychic arrows, they accuse you of being selfish. When you finally say no, they call you arrogant because you dared to own your truth. They whisper that you've changed, but what they really mean is you're no longer small enough to make me comfortable. This is not disagreement. This is identity warfare. To Jung, projection wasn't just a psychological quirk. It was a defense mechanism for the ego, a way for people to avoid facing their own shadow. So instead of seeing you for who you are, they see the parts of themselves they've disowned and punish you for carrying them. You become the villain in their story, not because you've done wrong, but because your presence exposes something they can't bear to admit. And the hardest part, it's usually unconscious. They don't know they're doing it. But the impact is real. Suddenly you're walking on eggshells. You're shrinking to stay liked. You're questioning yourself. Was I really too much? Did I go too far? No, you simply became a mirror they weren't ready to look into. Jung believed this kind of projection is psychologically violent. It doesn't bruise the skin. It bruises the self. You begin to forget who you are, because you're constantly being misnamed, misunderstood, miscast, in someone else's inner drama. But here's the deeper danger. If you stay in that theater long enough, you might start believing the script. So what do? You cut the cord, not out of cruelty, but out of psychic self-defense. Because no amount of explaining will convince someone determined to see their fear in your face. No boundary will feel reasonable to someone projecting their own selfishness onto your self-care. You can't heal where you're being blamed for wounds that aren't yours. Jung taught that real growth begins when we reclaim our projections, when we own the parts of us we once feared. But until the projector faces their shadow, they'll keep casting it on the nearest screen. And often, that screen is you. So protect your light. Not everyone who dislikes you is seeing you. Sometimes they're just running from themselves, and you happen to be in the way. Not all toxic people shout. Some simply stay. They don't scream. They don't sabotage. But they sit in the same place they always have, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and beg you to stay with them there. Carl Jung warned of something far more dangerous than chaos. Inertia, the refusal to grow, the quiet comfort of stagnation. In his words, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. And that applies to all relationships. You know these people. They complain about the same job year after year, but never leave it. They dream aloud, but mock you for chasing yours. When you bring up a new idea, they raise an eyebrow, not out of concern, but out of fear. Not of what might go wrong, but of what your growth might say about their stillness. These people don't physically harm you, but they chain your wings with invisible guilt. They say they miss the old you, but what they really miss is their comfort zone. Jung called this refusal to grow a failure of individuation, the process of becoming your true self. the journey of psychological wholeness, and to him, it wasn't optional, it was a moral duty, because when someone chooses not to evolve, they don't just hurt themselves, they slowly rot, and that rot spreads to the people around them. You might start to dim your light so they feel less left behind, skip opportunities just to keep the peace, stay small to avoid making them uncomfortable. That isn't kindness, that's codependency, dressed as compassion. You can't drag someone into their own becoming, that's not your weight to carry. And sometimes, the greatest act of love you can offer someone trapped in time is distance. Let them sit with their stillness, let them hear the silence when you stop clapping for their excuses. Growth can be contagious, but only if they choose to catch it. You're not betraying them by moving forward, you're just refusing to die with them. Carl Jung didn't believe in meaningless chaos. To him, the storms people create aren't accidents, they're messages, tools, weapons. Drama, in this sense, becomes an identity, and for some, it's the only one they have. There are people who seem magnetized to conflict. Their lives lurch from crisis to crisis, never stable, never still, but beneath the surface, there's a pattern. The chaos feeds their ego, it gives them purpose, attention, a sense of being alive. When real depth is absent, manufactured intensity becomes the substitute. These individuals often don't want peace, because peace would make them invisible, and so, they stir the pot, not always loudly. Sometimes it's subtle, passive aggression, vague threats, constant misunderstandings, but the outcome is the same. You're always on edge. You're always responding. Jung warned about these people. He believed they operate not from shadow alone, but from a deep resistance to integration. They don't want to heal. They want others to join their war. Their chaos becomes a system, a world they rule, one where your guilt, your empathy, your sense of responsibility becomes the leash. They'll say things like, "You're the only one who understands me," or, "I guess I just push people away." These are not cries for help. They're contracts, signed with emotion, sealed with obligation, because once you engage, you're inside the spiral, and once inside, your energy goes to managing them, not evolving yourself. Jung's advice wasn't romantic, it wasn't hopeful. He didn't believe everyone could be saved. Some people are not meant to be reformed, they're meant to be recognized and avoided. The moment you see the pattern, the moment you realize the chaos isn't random, is the moment you have a choice: walk away, or get pulled under, because engaging with the architect of chaos doesn't just waste your time, it erodes your identity. It makes you chaotic, not out of malice, but proximity. Jung was clear, you become what you orbit. So if someone's always in crisis, always pulling you into battles that aren't yours, step back, step out. It's not your job to fix what they designed to be broken. Not all healing feels gentle. Sometimes, it feels like a blade. Not one drawn in malice, but one wielded in necessity. Carl Jung never taught us to cut people off in rage. He didn't teach superiority, he taught hygiene, not of the body, but of the psyche. Because just as a rotting tooth poisons the blood, a toxic relationship seeps into the soul. To walk away is not always an act of hate. Sometimes, it's the loudest declaration of love, for your future self, for your sanity, for the peace that's quietly dying inside you every time you allow chaos to stay. We often think we owe people permanence, because of shared history, because they once smiled at us, because they're family. But Jung asks us a terrifying question. What if the people you cling to are merely characters in a script you no longer need to perform? Some connections weren't meant to be healed, they were meant to be dissolved, not with bitterness, but with clarity. This isn't arrogance, it's awareness. You're not the villain for leaving a table where your soul is starved. You're not cruel for choosing silence over screaming. You're not broken for wanting solitude in a world addicted to noise. You're evolving, and evolution always demands a death of roles, of illusions, of borrowed identities that no longer fit. See, Jung believed that most people are asleep, not in their beds, but in their minds. They operate from wounds they've never met, from fears they've never named, and when you begin to wake up, you don't just see clearly, you feel everything they've been numbing. And that's when the real choice begins. Will you keep shrinking to match their comfort zone, or will you rise, knowing it may cost you their presence? There is nothing noble about staying in places that drain you. There is no moral prize for enduring spiritual suffocation. You don't need to burn to keep others warm. You are not a furnace. You are not a fix. Your energy is finite. Your time, non-refundable, and your peace. It's not a luxury, it's your life support. To cut someone off doesn't mean you hate them. It means you no longer allow their unconscious chaos to write your story. You wish them healing, but from afar, you wish them insight, but without letting them vandalize your mental home. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is walk away without slamming the door. Just let it close, quietly, fully, finally, and then turn inward, not to blame yourself, but to ask, what part of me kept inviting in the storm, mistaking it for rain? That's where the true healing begins. Because cutting off isn't the end, it's the beginning of remembering who you were before the noise. It's the gentle art of cleaning the wound without reopening it. It's understanding that boundaries are not walls, they're filters. They don't shut the world out. They let the right people in. Jung invites us to watch others with compassion, but act with conviction. He teaches us to see humans as walking mysteries, most of whom are lost, not evil, confused, not cruel, but that doesn't mean you let them drown you just because they're sinking. In a world of unconscious entanglement, clarity is rebellion. Choosing peace over people who profit from your pain is not selfish, it's sacred. So as you step back, breathe, bless them, and let go. Because as Jung so hauntingly said, in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order. You are allowed to choose that order, even if it means walking alone, until you find those who walk with you in truth, not trauma. There's a kind of person who walks through life wearing a mask so perfectly crafted, even they believe it's their face. To Carl Jung, this wasn't vanity, it was tragedy. He called it the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society, to gain approval, to survive. But for some, the mask becomes everything. There is no person beneath it, only a void. These people are not full of themselves. They are hollow. They crave admiration like oxygen, because without it, they vanish. You don't meet the real them, you meet a performance, and the scariest part, they believe the act too. Jung warned us, the longer you wear the mask, the harder it is to take off. Eventually, the persona replaces the soul. These are the narcissists, not in the way pop culture defines them, as merely self-absorbed or confident, but in the way Jung saw them, as people terrified of facing their own shadow. So instead, they project. Projection is a powerful Jungian defense mechanism. It's the process of unconsciously casting your disowned qualities, the dark, painful, shameful aspects of yourself, onto someone else. Narcissists master this. They make you feel what they can't face. Their shame becomes your burden, their rage, your fault, their emptiness, your job to fill. They won't love you, they'll use you to love themselves, and if you stop reflecting back the fantasy they've built, they will discard you like a broken mirror. This isn't love, it's enslavement. In today's world, this archetype is everywhere, polished, filtered, and monetized. Social media breeds personas. Influencer culture rewards performance, not presence. Likes become identity. Attention becomes worth. And behind it all, a generation afraid to be real. The narcissist is not a villain in the traditional sense. They are lost souls, disconnected from the self. But that doesn't make them safe to keep around. Jung believed the path to wholeness, individuation, requires confronting the shadow. The narcissist refuses, and they will drag you down to keep from seeing their reflection. The danger isn't just their manipulation, it's what they awaken in you, the impulse to mirror, to please, to prove you matter. That's the trap. Cut them off, not out of hatred, but out of mercy. Mercy for your mind, your energy, your truth. You cannot save someone who has replaced their soul with a mask. You can only refuse to wear one for them. In the end, Jung's warning is clear. The narcissist's void is not your responsibility to fill. Let them vanish into their own reflection. And as for you, remove your own mask. Face your shadow. That's where your real strength lives. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Among the most haunting examples of this truth is the person who clings to victimhood like a badge of honor, not to heal, but to hide. They are not simply in pain, they are the pain. Their suffering is no longer a chapter, it has become the entire book. You try to help, offer insight, extend compassion, but nothing sticks. Nothing changes, because change would mean effort. Growth would mean accountability, and accountability would shatter the myth they've carefully constructed that the world is against them and they are forever powerless. These individuals hijack your empathy and feed on your guilt. They cry, crumble, collapse, and you rush in to rescue, but it's never enough. Because their story isn't meant to end, it's meant to repeat, again and again, until you forget who you were before you met them. You start walking on eggshells, you silence your needs, you reorganize your entire life around their emotional weather system. This isn't kindness, it's control, wrapped in tears. Psychologically, this aligns with the concept of learned helplessness, a term born from experiments in the 1960s where animals, subjected to uncontrollable pain, stopped trying to escape, even when the door was open. The same can happen to people, and some learn to love the cage, especially if it gets them sympathy. In the digital age, this behavior is amplified. Online, we often see trauma turned into performance. Vulnerability is monetized. Suffering is curated for engagement. And slowly, a new kind of ego emerges, one that doesn't brag about strength, but about scars. Here the victim isn't seeking healing, they're seeking an audience. But Jung warned us, unresolved wounds fester. And when pain becomes identity, the soul withers. True compassion doesn't mean enabling this. It means seeing clearly and setting boundaries with love, not resentment. Because some people don't want a ladder out of the pit, they just want someone to sit at the bottom with them, forever. And if you're not careful, their story becomes your sentence. Jung didn't believe in meaningless disorder. To him, recurring chaos was never accidental. It was psychological, it was archetypal. Those who constantly manufacture drama are not victims of life's turbulence. They are architects of it, and they need it. Because in the stillness, they would have to confront something more terrifying than conflict, their own reflection. These are the people who turn every dinner into a battlefield, every group into factions, every calm moment into a ticking bomb. To be around them is to be in a constant state of tension, because you never know what will set them off. The rules change mid-sentence, the boundaries dissolve, and suddenly you're apologizing for something you didn't even do. But this is not random. It's ritual. These individuals are often consumed by what Jung called an autonomous complex, a fragment of the psyche that splits off and behaves like a separate personality. It hijacks the ego, it speaks for the person, and it thrives on chaos, because chaos gives it control. They use triangulation to create confusion, pitting people against each other to remain the center of attention. They employ guilt as a tool, silence as punishment, praise as manipulation. You begin to walk on eggshells, shrinking your truth to avoid setting them off. And when you try to leave, they erupt. Because without the drama, they feel empty. In today's world, this pattern plays out on screens as much as in living rooms. Social media feeds are flooded with rage baiting, performative outrage, and crisis cycles that never end. Viral meltdowns masquerade as truth-telling, and online personas are built on perpetual instability, not despite it, but because of it. Drama becomes currency, attention becomes survival. But Jung's warning remains timeless. When someone is possessed by an unconscious force, they no longer have emotions, the emotions have them. And until the person reclaims awareness, they are not in relationship with others. They are in relationship with their complex, dragging everyone else into it like emotional gravity. True healing begins with confronting this possession, stepping out of the storm and into the silence. But for the architect of chaos, silence feels like death. And so they keep building, until someone finally says this chaos isn't mine, and walks away. They enter softly, smiling, listening, laughing at the right cues, not loud, not brash. In fact, they're everything you've ever wanted in a friend, lover, mentor. It feels like fate. But what you're actually encountering is a mirror, one trained in the art of emotional reflection. Jung called this energy, the trickster, not malicious, but detached, elusive, and deeply unconcerned with the truth. The trickster doesn't lie to hurt. They lie because the truth has no meaning to them. Their deception isn't emotional, it's strategic. They observe you like a chessboard, every strength catalogued, every wound memorized, every insecurity silently bookmarked, and then, with surgical precision, they shapeshift into whatever makes you feel safe, understood, and seen. You never stood a chance, because you were never in a relationship, you were in a performance. And yet, the damage they do is profound, because you weren't just betrayed, you were studied. You gave your vulnerability to someone who wasn't there, just a reflection. And when they finally get what they came for, your love, your secrets, your loyalty, they pull away, leaving behind an echo of intimacy that never actually existed. This is gaslighting at its most elegant. You question your instincts. You second-guess the entire relationship. You might even blame yourself. How could I not have seen it? But that's the power of the illusionist. They never take with force. They let you hand over the key. In modern culture, this archetype thrives in influencer relationships, corporate dynamics, even politics. The illusion is so strong, people rally behind them until the truth leaks out. But by then, the damage is done, and the illusionist has already moved on, charming their next reflection. Jung believed the trickster was a symbol of transformation, a chaos agent that forces us to confront our own blind spots. Because if someone could so easily fake being what we crave, maybe we need to ask, what hunger blinded us? What ache made us believe the mask? The illusionist teaches a brutal lesson. Emotional intelligence, without empathy, is manipulation, and not everyone who listens cares. Some only listen to learn how to disarm you. So be careful who you give your truth to. Not all who hold it want to protect it. Some just want to learn how to use it against you. This type vanishes when things get real. They aren't just physically absent, they're emotionally gone, unreachable, aloof. One moment, you feel close. The next, you're speaking into a void. Jung described this as a repression of the anima, or animus, the emotional, intuitive parts of ourselves. The ghost fears those parts. Vulnerability feels dangerous, so they retreat when intimacy shows up. At first they seem calm, even grounding, but soon you notice they never really open up. You share something personal, and they change the subject. You cry, and they flinch. You need closeness, and they disappear. And here's the damage. It teaches you that connection is fragile, that expressing your needs will push people away. You start monitoring your emotions. You apologize for needing too much. You become hyper-independent, not because you want to be, but because you feel you have to be. This is the root of avoidant attachment styles, often born from dismissive parenting, where feelings were ignored, downplayed, or punished. In adulthood, it shows up as ghosting, emotional aloofness, and a deep fear of being too much. The ghost isn't cruel, they're afraid, but if you're not careful, you'll absorb their fear. You'll start ghosting yourself. Protect yourself by honoring what they run from emotional presence. Don't shrink to keep someone from leaving. Feel what they refuse to feel, and stay, even when it's uncomfortable, because your needs aren't the problem, their absence is. They don't scream, they don't strike, they don't betray you outright, they just stay quiet. These are the ones who smile through the wreckage, who nod as dysfunction rots the room. They call it peace, but it's really paralysis, a soul too sedated to speak truth. Jung called this participation mystique, the psychic merging where a person dissolves their will just to belong. They are not the ones who throw the match, but they watch the fire spread and do nothing. These people destroy you not with their actions but their inaction. They never challenge the cruelty, never question the lie, never break the silence, and in doing so, they become accomplices to everything that breaks you. You start to doubt yourself. Maybe nothing's wrong, you think. Maybe the problem is me, and that's their legacy. Confusion, gaslight by omission. Their passivity becomes poison, slowly dissolving your ability to trust what you feel. In their world, keeping the peace matters more than telling the truth. Harmony is worshipped, even if it's built on broken bones, and so dysfunction flourishes, not because the abuser is strong, but because the bystanders are silent. They're the ones who never stood up for you, and eventually, you stop standing up for yourself. Carl Jung never said to run from darkness. He said to know it, because if you don't, it runs you. Every type we've explored, the narcissist, the victim, the chaos bringer, the ghost, the trickster, the enabler, they're real, yes. But more than that, they're mirrors. Reflections of what happens when we live in fragments, not wholeness. The narcissist denies the shadow. The victim denies the self. The chaos bringer fears stillness. The ghost fears intimacy. The trickster rejects sincerity. The enabler fears conflict. And all of them fear consciousness. That's the common thread. Unawareness. Not evil. Not malice. Just people lost in their own sleep. And if you're not careful, they'll lull you into it too. You don't protect your psyche by avoiding people. You protect it by seeing clearly. You learn to set boundaries, not walls. You get intimate with your own shadow, so no one can use it against you. You stop mistaking silence for peace, or chaos for depth, or attention for love. You don't need to become hard. You need to become whole. And that begins with knowing this. The people who destroy you don't always mean to, but if you don't recognize them, they will.